We're living through one of those moments in history that are pivotal. We call it a watershed moment. The world that was established in the aftermath of World War II, where we ended up pitting a superpower conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, and the United States became the de facto, if not the de jure, leader of the so-called free world. That world's come into an end now. Trump is not on the Epstein list. They don't have any incriminating information about Trump, because if it existed, do you think for a minute that Biden and his crew would have sat on it and not put that out? Oh, heavens no. They were throwing everything they could at Trump. Trump has betrayed his base with this, because he promised to release the files. Now all of a sudden, oh, there's nothing there. There are no files. There's no list. Nonsense.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Larry Johnson. Larry is a former CIA analyst and State Department counterterrorism advisor. He brings tremendous insights as it relates to global security, intelligence, and the rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. Larry, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Happy to sit down for the chat.
Well, I've been looking forward to it. I've been working hard to try and get you on the show. So I got lucky. Wanted to start off getting your current take on things in the world, as geopolitically wise.
We're living through one of those moments in history that are pivotal. We call it a watershed moment. The world that was established in the aftermath of World War II, where we ended up pitting a superpower conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, and the United States became the de facto, if not the de jure, leader of the so-called free world. That world's come into an end now, and the United States is not really ready for that crisis. We're losing the control we thought we had. The supremacy of the dollar has been, given us the ability to run up these incredible deficits. But you're not old enough to remember Ronald Reagan, but the vision Reagan brought in was one of this, quoting Isaiah, city on a hill, making America a place, a beacon of light to the world. And I grew up very much in that mindset that the United States represented something that was the best hope for the world, the best hope for mankind. But now that I've been on this earth for 70 years, and as I look back, I realize for most of my life, the United States has spent its treasure and some of its blood in needless wars overseas. We got launched fully in Vietnam in the 60s, but then we kept it up. Syria, Libya, Iraq twice, Afghanistan, Serbia, Panama. We've really left a trail of tears. And instead of engendering goodwill, we've created a lot of animosity towards us. And I saw it firsthand once. Good Lord, this was 25 years ago in Panama, and we were doing an investigation of product counterfeiting. And there's this one port. It's called the Lone Coconut, Coco Solo. And we were talking with one of the employees there, a woman, and I forgot how the conversation came up, but it turned out U.S. soldiers killed 2 of her children when the U.S. invaded Panama to take out Manuel Noriega, a guy who we put into power, a guy who was on the payroll of the CIA, but we decided now he's no longer useful to us. We're going to get rid of him. Naturally, she was still mourning and grieving, even though those children had been killed 11 years earlier. So, when you see firsthand sort of the results of our policies, they give this the president can sit in the White House and make these decisions, and they don't understand that the human cost that comes with it. And so where we're at right now is more and more of the world is standing up saying, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And that's why you're seeing the rise of BRICS. It's expanding. It now has 21 either full partners and or full members and or partner nations. They represent 55, those 21 countries represent 55% of the world's population and almost half of the world's economy. So the era of the United States being able to control and dictate things it's coming to an end, and yet we persist. So we continue to, despite Donald Trump's, I'll call him out. He lied to us. He was gonna end the war in Ukraine. Nope. He keeps sending money, keeps sending intelligence, keeps it going. That he was not going to get us involved with needless wars. Decides to bomb Iran. And we can get into that in particular because, again, the story, the American public are largely fed a narrative that's completely false. Just as an example, how many countries has Ukraine invaded? Has Iran invaded over the last, since the Ayatollah took over in 1979? Well, the answer to that would be zero. None. They were involved with the war with Iraq, how did that start? Oh, yeah. The United States, who had helped put Saddam Hussein in power, encouraged Iraq to attack Iran. But not only did we encourage it, we armed Iraq with chemical weapons. We gave them the chemicals that they used to make chemical weapons. We were the ones spreading weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't Iran. So, but the way the story is told now is, Iran's this ultimate evil and we got to stop them. They were in negotiations with the United States to put an end to that nuclear, to provide us the guarantees and assurances that they weren't working on a nuclear weapon. And 2 days before we're supposed to hold the negotiations again, Trump green lights an attack on Iran. Now, wait a second. I thought you were the peace president. Instead of being the peace president, you authorize an attack that, candidly, it almost ended up destroying Israel. So, we've got ourselves in the habit of, we spend so much of our money overseas trying to subvert other countries. And my old outfit, the CIA, has been the primary mover in that activity for really since its inception in 1947. That's the 30,000-foot view there. I'm not happy with where we're at. I think we become, instead of a force for good, a force for evil, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I mentioned on other podcasts, I come from a military family, and my dad was in the Navy. He went over he was in the Gulf War, and then he was over in Operation Iraqi Freedom. It was over in Kuwait, in that area. And I ended up going to the Navy after college and wanted to get in the special warfare program, got my ass handed to me. And there's a quote from the author who wrote No Country for Old Men. And the quote is, "You never know what worse luck your bad luck has saved you from." And it's funny when I look back how, I had to get re-rated. For those who don't know, in the Navy, that's just getting another job. Luckily, I was a corpsman for a brief period of time, but and not a deck seaman. But I say that because I've had a complete shift in my view on things.
Yeah.
And as it relates to the U.S. and where it is in the world, and the narrative that's put out there.
Yeah. That's the problem we get. It's very simple. Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism. Really? So let's go to the State Department Bureau of Counterterrorism, where I used to work. In my day, it was called the Office of the Coordinator for Counterterrorism. Every April, they are required to publish an annual report on terrorism. We used to call it Global Patterns of Global Terrorism. Now they call it Country Reports on Terrorism. And off and on, they've always tried to list either the top 5 or the top 10 most active terrorist groups. So you, in the last, 10, 12 years, they started doing the top 10 in the statistical annex in 2017. Not a single one of the groups in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, not a single one of those groups was identified as having any ties whatsoever to Iran. They were all Sunni backed. That means they were all backed by the Gulf Arabs, Saudis, the Qataris, the United Arab Emirates, the Kuwaitis. Not a one backed by Iran. The same thing with Hamas. We're told, Hamas is this terrorist organization. So I found that the Israeli Foreign Ministry actually publishes a database or a list of every incident. Started, I think it was September of 2000. But they list every single attack by the Palestinians against Israelis or foreigners visiting Israel. It was over the course of that 24 years. I looked at the data from 2000 up through April 2024. That's when I put this study together last year. There were fewer than 600 terrorist attacks over that period. Total casualties, killed in action, killed by terrorists, 1,517 over a 24-year period. Okay, I'm saying it's nothing. That is because we're not talking suicide bombings or going into cafes and shooting the place up. Most of it was one-on-one, personal, sort of what I'd call Hatfield-McCoy kind of fighting back and forth. Again, it's all fighting over territory. Of those 600 terrorist attacks over the 24-year period, only 105 were linked to Hamas. So you could say, hey, Hamas is engaged with terrorism. Well, how do we define terrorism? Terrorism is the use of violence against civilians for political purposes. I think that's a great definition. It was used by Bibi Netanyahu. He defined terrorism on a TV show in 1987 with William F. Buckley. And that's a good definition. If we use that definition, it turns out Israel's a far bigger terrorist than Hamas or Hezbollah combined in terms of just the number of civilians they've killed. But, we're sold that, Hamas is this terrible terrorist organization. Meanwhile, just this last week, State Department said, hey, that terrorist group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, which had been listed as the 7th most active terrorist group in the world in terms of the number of people it killed, number 7, we took it off the terrorist list. Why? Well, because the United States, installed its leader. It used to be called al-Jilani. We've now put him in power under the name of al-Shara. So here we say that we're fighting this war on terrorism, that we're really against those terrorists. And what do? We put a terrorist in charge of Syria, and what his people are doing? They're killing Christians. Syria remains one of the oldest Christian settlements in the world. And so al-Shara's guys from HTS went out, sacked a Christian village. And do you hear any of the Christians in the United States speaking out? Nope. Dead silence. So that's why I say the hypocrisy of the United States when it was, we're against terrorism. We're fighting terrorism. And we're the biggest enablers of it. time and time again.
Yeah, I was. I've got a family member, and they watch. Legacy media, if you will. And, I was I was sharing with them a lot of the viewpoints that I'm hearing that are quite different from the mainstream take on, Israeli, narrative, if you will, as it relates to, what's going on. And, I didn't want to get into it, but I just think it's very alarming how people are put into these camps, and it's very alarming with what's going on over there, from what I'm hearing in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, it's a genocide. I mean, it's blatant murder. Um, when Hamas launched the attack on October 7th, it was primarily directed at military and kibbutz targets with armed settlers. And they killed a lot of Israeli soldiers. They wiped out an element of the Golani Brigade, which is one of the most elite units in Israel. And people say, well, they just did that out of why were they so mad? Well, they've been living in an open air prison for all of their lives, and have no freedom of movement. They're walled in, not allowed to travel. They're doing the same thing my ancestors did back in 1776. When you feel like you've got a colonial oppressor, you take some weapons and you go fight them. Now, when they captured, they took several hostages, and the hostage taking was a deliberate part of the plan. I'm not saying I endorse that at all. I think it's it's wrong, but I know why they did it, because Israel is holding about 9,000 Palestinians in prison with no charges. They were hostages. So, Hamas had learned that the only way they get their people out is to grab Israelis and trade them. But the other part of the story that wasn't really told is that after the early success of the Hamas attack, when Israel struck back at the vehicles that were fleeing that festival, the Apache helicopters were blowing those cars up right and left. They were killing their own Israeli citizens. So it's estimated as many out of the I think it was 1,159 total fatalities that day, and I'd say upwards of over 400 were killed by the Israelis themselves through the attacks on those cars. But so let's put that body count there. Well, here's Bibi Netanyahu saying this is the worst thing since the Holocaust. And you go, what? You tell them the Holocaust, you claim 6 million Jews were murdered. So now you're telling me that 1,500 or 1,159 is the worst thing since 6 million? I mean, it's an insult to those who were survivors of the Holocaust to even make such a stupid comparison. But the problem Israel faces is it's always had the reputation for having the most powerful army in the Middle East. Yet we're now 21 months into this war against Hamas. And, Israel has every military advantage you could imagine. They have artillery, they have tanks, armored personnel carriers, they have fixed wing combat aircraft, they have rotary wing combat aircraft, they have an enormous array of intelligence, ISR platforms, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. They're fighting a ragtag militia force that has sidearms, rifles, pistols. They have some RPGs. They've got a couple of 50 caliber, Barretts, 50 caliber rifles that can shoot some distance. But that's it. They don't have artillery. They've got some crude mortars. They don't have tanks. no armored personnel carriers, and certainly not the kind of intelligence resources. And yet, Israel can't beat them. They tried, because what they're really trying to do is destroy the civilians, killing all the Palestinians, wiping them out. And they keep using the excuse that the Hamas is using the Palestinians as human shields, and that's why Israel has to blow up schools and hospitals and churches. You know, they've blown up, they've destroyed well over like 26 hospitals, I believe. Number may be higher, that were in Gaza. And if you recall, during the 12-day war with Iran launched a missile that hit a military target that was next to a hospital. And the blast wave from that missile shattered glass in the hospital. Oh my God, were the Israelis outraged. This is a war crime that, it's like, you guys can dish it out, but you can't take it. And this wasn't even Iran targeting the hospital. It did hit the building next door, and it did destroy the Israeli military facility. But it shows the hypocrisy on the part of the Zionists. Is probably a more accurate term.
I was going to make a comment. As I learn more of this world, Larry, and I feel fortunate that I have a little bit more margin in the day, perhaps than your average Joe, to kind of go down the rabbit hole and learn and dive into this stuff. It seems as you put it, the Zionists, if you will, the Mossad, things of that nature, they are very entrenched, not just in the U.S. here, but just geographically speaking. And it is a very, very fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
But, think about it this way, we're raised in the United States. And so you grow up with this whole narrative of, because both if you're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, you're still going to hear some variation of the story of how the children of Israel were enslaved in Egypt. You've seen Charlton Heston in 10 Commandments and Let My People Go. And so the entire narrative you fed is about, hey, Israel is a fulfillment of prophecy. There is that sort of religious understanding, even among the people who aren't religious, that understanding and acceptance. Well, go to India, China, South Korea, Japan. They don't have a clue what you're talking about, because they are not steeped in Jewish, Christian, or Muslim tradition. Get into Western India, yeah, you do get the Muslim influence there. But by and large, Confucius, Hinduism, Taoism, other non-Western religions prevail over there. They have no idea about. Tell me again why these Jews get to tell these Palestinians that it's their land and not they have to leave. Oh, it's in this book that we have that was written by God, or God dictated it to Moses. And they're going, yeah, right. I consider myself a religious person, but let's stop kidding ourselves about some of the mythology that we've been fed, because that mythology has been used to justify current policies that support the murder of children. Now, and we saw it with Ted Cruz. Did you catch the Ted Cruz interview with Tucker Carlson?
I watched a little bit of it. Yeah, that was heated.
And did you see where Cruz said the reason he ran for Senate was he wanted to be able to defend Israel? And if so, wait a second, you're from Texas, dude. How about defending America first with that? And so then, Tucker asked him, and Cruz said, well, the Bible says we must support Israel, because if those who support him, they're blessed. And if you don't support him, you're cursed. And so he said, I want us to be blessed. And Tucker was like, what? You're basing foreign policy off of a book that was written by Jewish scholars while in Babylonian captivity, captive by Nebuchadnezzar in roughly 550 BC. And so you're basing our foreign policy on what was written in that book? Because it was clearly written from a Jewish perspective, because the God there is, you get contradictory God. You get the God that says, thou shalt not kill. Great. Then a few chapters later, go out and kill all those people. Well, wait a second. Who's talking here? Which God is it? Is it the God that says, you know what? You, the Jews, are the most special people in all the world, and I love you more than I love all those others. Now, wait, are they all your creation or not? So, I don't mean to get into the whole theological deep hole here, but it's just, there's a lot of contradictions in there that people don't step back and objectively look at. And those who are practice Christianity, they will point out, correctly so, that when Jesus came, it was no longer about, hey, you got to be in the Jewish brotherhood to be part of God's people, because the message of Jesus was everyone is a son and daughter of God, everyone, not just a select few. And so that's a radical different message. But unfortunately, this Christian Zionism has crept in, that we are now found ourselves justifying the most horrific crimes. And we got members of the Israeli Knesset speaking openly about exterminating the children because they could grow up to become terrorists. Gee, where have we heard language like that? Well, there was a guy named Heinrich Himmler, Adolf Hitler. That was what they said about Jewish children back then. That's why they threw Jewish babies in crematoriums, burned them alive. So all of a sudden, we've got now this people that claim that their entire basis for existence is they had to escape this Holocaust, are inflicting a new Holocaust upon people who are genetically their cousins.
Yeah, it's always interesting with different groups being persecuted. Obviously, like over here, of course, you're in the U.S. as well, but you've got different factions. Whether it's hey, reparations, or hey, this or that. Every group has blood on their hands and has done this, and it's just crazy with what goes on, especially what goes on behind the scenes that is not put out there. It seems that given that Trump's administration being as in bed as they are with the Zionist movement,
Yeah,
that we're going to continue to see more and more conflict, particularly as I suspect neocons and things of that nature need to foment some type of conflict to create a distraction and to divert away from the impending default crisis that engulfs much of the world, particularly the West.
Yeah, well, it's bipartisan. The control that AIPAC exercises over our political process is significant. And remember that Joe Biden, when he was a senator, he was the largest recipient of AIPAC money of everybody in the Senate. So you've seen these policies, sort of consistent policies, to provide uncritical support for Israel, regardless of who's president. The last president who actually pushed back on the Israeli influence in American politics was John F. Kennedy. In fact, his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, signed off on a letter that was sent to the predecessor of AIPAC, informing them that they were going to have to register as a foreign lobby under Pharaoh. And it was a month after that letter was sent that Kennedy was killed. Coincidence? There's a lot when you go through the files that some of they haven't released all the files on JFK, but what files that were recently released, it's now quite clear that the CIA was actively involved, and that there was a tie both between organized crime, a fellow named Meyer Lansky, and then Mossad, because Kennedy was also pressing on trying to prevent Israel from getting a nuclear bomb. And during that period, there was nuclear material stolen from a Pennsylvania reactor and smuggled into Israel to Dimona. So, but since Kennedy, you've had presidents, from Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush. They've all basically pandered to Israel and not tried to force any kind of put any pressure on them to come to an agreement. Always, the narrative in the West is always that, oh, well, the Palestinians can never accept the deal. Well, what most people don't know is that, like when Hamas organized in, I think it was like late '87, shortly thereafter, Mossad started funding Hamas. They weren't doing it. They weren't showing up saying, "Hi, we're from Mossad. We're here to give you some money." It was doing it through cutouts, where Hamas thought that they were getting money from Arab supporters in the Gulf. Well, why was Mossad doing that? They wanted to create Hamas as an entity that would be as a counterweight to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or now known as the Palestinian Authority, just specifically to sabotage any prospect of a peace deal being reached, of creating a two-state solution. So, they played that game all along. So that's I said, we're fed narratives, and we need to, be a little more eager about questioning what we're told.
And as it relates to the presidents post Kennedy that you mentioned, Larry, where they have been very much in support of Israel and such, and as we learn more about the Epstein case, and even though things have been withheld and such and continue to do, and when you listen to other people talk about whether they were, I was just listening to a gal the other day who reports having been being held captive by Epstein, and hearing her thoughts, and hearing other people who were former CIA or things of that nature. And you keep hearing about CIA and Mossad.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm getting at is, it seems that there is a degree of blackmail, whether that's sexual blackmail or some other means, to pigeonhole and to put people in power in such a position whereby they have to acquiesce,
Mm-hmm.
and go about that. And that's not only very disturbing, but it's just mind blowing to me how pervasive that is. And as it relates to Epstein, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or how entrenched things are.
Well, first, I don't think that Trump is on the, I know Trump is not on the Epstein list. They don't have any incriminating information about Trump, because if it existed, do you think for a minute that Biden and his crew would have sat on it and not put that out? Oh, heavens no. They were throwing everything they could at Trump. No, I think what's going on is the intelligence, the exposure of Mossad and CIA involvement with that whole operation, coupled with several of the people that are on the list. And I put the list up at sonar21.com 2 days ago. It was compiled by Ryan Dawson. And Ryan didn't just sit down and make names up. He went through all the court transcripts of these various women who came forward, leveled charges, and then they identified the people that they were forced to have sex with or were involved in some way. And one of those on the list is Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots. Well, Kraft got busted in Florida. Was it 5 years ago? At an Asian massage parlor. And God knows what the ages of the girls in there were, if they were underage or not. So, I mean, he got arrested. But he's got money, got off of the charges. Didn't go to jail like a normal person would have had to do. So Trump has betrayed his base with this, because he promised to release the files. Now all of a sudden, oh, there's nothing there. There are no files. There's no list. Nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And I think it's the intelligent, whether you can make the case that maybe he didn't know fully what was in there before. And then once he was finally briefed on, hey, Mr. President, if you do this, these friends of yours who have been big financial donors to your campaign, they're gonna face legal risk. Oh, I can't do that. Or, hey, this is going to compromise. It's going to directly implicate Israel in promoting pedophilia, or statutory rape, and that comes at a time where we don't want to get more people angry at Israel for what it's doing already. So yeah, this is, and Trump just trying to pretend to go to, well, you're still asking about that guy. I mean, Trump is he's losing support.
What was I going to say? I was going to mention with Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, how they were, effectively saying, "Hey, we've got this list. Let's prosecute it. Let's pursue this." And then there's been a complete about face, and I've heard from other commentators that the only impetus for that would be, basically you're threatened or your family is in some capacity. And
yeah.
I used to be part of an investment group down south in Orange County, and there's this group called the New California Move. I'm here in Central California and presently, and I remember this is a couple years ago, Larry, and he mentioned about one of the older gentlemen who was part of this New California movement. He during the course of his dissertation on it with this private group, he mentioned that a couple of his couple people within his organization have been killed. And I was, to preface, not in this world that I am in now in terms of alternative media and other narratives. And it really shocked me that after the meeting, when everyone was grabbing coffee and chit-chatting, I went up to him. I said, do you really mean that, people from your group? I was just kind of like baffled, like, were actually killed? Like, and he's like, yeah, dead serious. And I'm like, wow. And that was my first kind of awareness that, and then that's led to other things. I mean, you mentioned the pedophilic centric group, with Epstein and all these agencies and such. I started last year kind of on my journey about wanting to learn about how to invest more. Learned about sound money, learned about central banks, private central banks, learned all this stuff. And then naturally you want to know, well, who controls that? And then, people talk about people forced behind the BIS, Bank of England, things of that nature, transnationalists. And then you go further and further down the rabbit hole, and then you encounter the elite cults, pedophilia. And it's like, I'm in like La La Land now.
Well, ask yourself, who was president when Jeffrey Epstein was killed? Donald Trump. So I'm sure that Trump told the Justice Department, get on top of this right away. Let's get to the bottom of this. They didn't, because I think Bill Barr was Attorney General at the time. Any connection between Bill Barr and Jeffrey Epstein? Oh, yeah. It turns out that Bill Barr's father had hired Jeffrey Epstein as a teacher at a private school back in the 70s, or maybe it was 80s. And hired him even though Epstein didn't have a college degree at all. So, yeah, what a small world. What a coincidence. I've got firm evidence from my partner who he filed an IRS tax case, a lawsuit making a claim on the Clinton Foundation for not paying taxes. And as part of the evidence that he collected, he was given the flight manifest of a particular flight that Epstein made from his island to, I believe it was Norway. It was either Norway or Sweden. And who was on board the plane? Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, and James Comey. Small world. Now, not what were they doing? Checking out in particular Comey, checking out a business investment. So this kind of, we actually, as I think back on it, we should have realized the fix was in with Trump on this. And he was talking to be talking. They had no intention to get to the bottom of this, because if he had, he would have given a damn back when it happened. He didn't. They went with, oh yeah, must have killed himself. So it's unfortunate. I think it's revealed something pretty dark and ugly about Donald Trump on this. It's sad to say, because I voted for him, but this has been a breaking point. Sort of the last straw. Apart from promising to reduce government spending, well, I threw that out the window. The largest budget now in history, and our deficit headed into even deeper waters. His activities, instead of bringing peace, promoting war. He really had he was given a historic moment where he could have actually been a figure that would have gone down in history books as truly a great president, because he could have come in and number one, brought an end to the wars, both in the war on the Palestinians and the war between Russia and Ukraine, but hasn't done that. Could have said, hey, we're going to scale back the military. We're going to start cutting. I'm closing immediately 300 military bases overseas. Our boys and girls are coming home. Could have done that. And then, cleaning up the border. I'm glad he did that. That's really the only promise he's kept, as far as I'm concerned, that is of any consequence. But the others, particularly on the foreign policy front, he's creating a real mess.
Wanted to also ask you. Obviously, you're on a lot of shows and such. What's one thing about the nature of this world that we're in, power structures, that would probably blow people away?
What do you mean?
Specifically, something as it relates to the nature of how intelligence is, or geopolitics is, or and such, that would come as a surprise to people in the world. Like, hey, this is actually what goes on. Or maybe you've already dissected that thoroughly.
Well, yeah, actually, I don't think it's so much. I don't think they'd necessarily be surprised. They just, when they learn, it's like with the whole Russiagate affair, and even the way it's still being talked about, as if that Comey and Brennan. John Brennan, the former CIA director, that they only got into this a little bit later, or that they lied to Congress, that was their great. They were deliberately involved in plotting and conspiring, I maintain, back in 2015. And even before Trump became candidate, or while he was one of the candidates, what was going on back then was Brennan had set up an was collecting intelligence on behalf of Hillary Clinton, that was on all the presidential candidates, including Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and on her Democratic opponent, Bernie Sanders. It was only later that, once Trump was looked certain to secure the nomination, that they then unleashed this. It's like a swift boat campaign, accusing him of being a Russian asset. But But that was deliberately planned, and it was coordinated between the CIA and the FBI, because there was a task force that John Brennan had organized, and my understanding is that Peter Strzok was involved with that task force. So once people realize that the story's not always as you're being told. There's a lot more behind the scenes. And again, I fault Trump on this, because he promised he'd release the records that would show what the CIA did. He never released the records. Never. So, that's where I get little empathy for him, because he's his own worst enemy. Instead of being upfront and transparent, he keeps a lot of things secret that shouldn't be kept secret.
Wow. Well, interesting times to say the least. Larry, how can people learn more about you and get in touch with you?
They can follow me at sonar21.com. Sonar21.com. That gives all the links.
Wow. Well, I'm going to continue to check out your website, which I love, by the way, and I appreciate you doing what you do and putting yourself out there, and would be honored to have you back on again later this year, Larry.
Hey, Christian, that'd be great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
All right. You take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Quick ask. Over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.